with them. The Wayback Machine is a service of the Internet Archive. If there's a mission statement for the Wayback Machine, it is to help make the web more useful and reliable. As in all things, this is an evolution. And so if people have suggestions on how we might evolve that, I'm certainly very, very open. We work in a lot of different media types, and in the process that we follow is to take analog material, digitize it, preserve it, and make it available to people. We also take digital information and preserve it and make it available. And so there's lots of examples that I could give about different media types. 78s, for example, Boston Public Library donated more than 200,000 78 records to us. We've digitized them. They're now available both on the Internet Archive as well as via Google Home and Alexa devices. You could say, hey, Google, ask the Internet Archive to play jazz 78s. And it'll play them, many of them, forever, actually, pretty much. We also work with microfilm. We are digitizing an extensive microfilm collection right now of serials, and these are publications, some of them more than 100 years worth of publications. There was an article in the Neiman Lab 2 weeks ago. I think the headline was something like, "The Internet Archive is helping to make the history of American newspapers searchable." And it was because of that work that we are doing. We also work in books, and I know that people have a lot of questions about books. We have more than 2 million books available for lending. We acquire books, we purchase books, and we digitize them, and we make them available for lending. Part of the effort that we took around this was we acquired, one of our sister nonprofits acquired a used bookstore called Better World Books a couple of years ago. And one of the primary reasons we took on that effort was so that we could get access to books that were referenced in Wikipedia articles. So I'll speak a little bit more about that. Back to the Wayback Machine, we archive more than about 18,000 URLs a second right now. And we make all of them available through web.archive.org. We archive URLs based on a variety of criteria. Many of them are as a result of what patrons do. For example, there's a service called Save Page Now that anyone can access. It's web.archive.org/save. And you can enter in a URL, and then we will archive that in real time. That service, Save Page Now, uses some high fidelity headless browser-based technology, which makes the playback, the quality of the archiving and the playback very, very good. It's not perfect, but we're constantly working to make it better. In addition to entering individual URLs through that UI, there's also a publicly accessible API for the service, and there's also an interface to Google Sheets. So many people put in tens of thousands of URLs a day into column A of a Google Sheet, and then submit that to the Save Page Now service, and we will archive those URLs. And when we archive a URL, we're actually archiving the HTML, and then all of the embedded page elements. If it's a web page, if it's a PDF file, it's a single file, obviously. But if it's a web page, often there will be tens or hundreds of individual URLs embedded in that page. We have to archive all of those as well. And then users may, if they're logged into archive.org, select an option to also archive outlinks, which means any link that's in that web page will also follow and archive those. That's the Save Page Now service is one example of how things get archived. Something like 3 million URLs are submitted, base URLs are submitted to that service every day. Okay, Jim. And then In addition, there are many other signals that we pay attention to, feeds from different platforms like WordPress, for example, or our Media Cloud, Ethan Zuckerman's project, to archive news, um, or Twitter outlinks, for example. But one of the ones that we're most excited about is our work with Wikipedia communities. And it really takes on two different forms. One right now is where we listen to the event stream API for every by the top 300 Wikipedia sites. And we archive all of the URLs that we discover in near real time, like within seconds. And then we also archive the outlinks for those into the Wayback Machine. We've been doing this for the better part of 10 years. Actually, we started not using the event stream API because it didn't exist. We used an IRC channel that we scraped back in the early days. Because of that, and because of the work we've been doing for a couple of decades, archiving much of the public web, we've got a pretty good representation of things that are referenced in Wikipedia articles and have been referenced in Wikipedia articles. So as a result of that, we're able to work with a bot, Internet Archive Bot, or IA bot, as people call it, and go through each individual Wikipedia site that the bot is configured for, look for broken links, and then try to fix them, to look into Wayback Machine and into other web archives. We're pretty agnostic about this. And if we find that we can fix the broken link, we do so. Internet Archive Bot is now running on about 66 Wikipedia sites. And we've rescued more than 14 million broken links. We do more than rescue broken links. There's a number of other links where a user can run Internet Archive Bot and they can say, add a Wayback Machine link to all of the links on this Wikipedia article. That can be done on an individual article basis by individual users. My goal this year is to have IA Bot running on as many of the 300 Wikipedia sites as possible. I'd like to be able to be running on all of them. The second big piece of work we're doing with Wikipedia and Wikipedia sites is adding links to books. And so Internet Archive Bot can also discover references, citations to books. And then if we have a digitized version of that book available from the Internet Archive, add a link to that digitized version. The IA Bot software is right now running on about 33 Wikipedia sites, adding links to books. I can report that so far this month, we've added about 50,000 links. And in January, we added about 90,000 links. This is on top of about 200,000 links that we added last year when we started up this project. We call the overall project Turn All References Blue. Our vision is that anytime there's a reference to something that's accessible via a URL, that thing in some fashion, it just may be a sample of that thing, should be available to people via a click. So the Turn All References Blue project is focused on web resources and books on Wikipedia sites, but we're expanding into other media, for example, academic papers through DOIs and other platforms in addition to Wikipedia. Obviously, Wikipedia sites are super useful by many people. They're also relatively easy to edit. So that's why we're focusing there. And so I'll just also note, we have a project called scholar.archive.org, which is actually scholar-QA. It hasn't graduated yet to just drop the QA, but scholar-qa.archive.org. And this is our work to preserve academic papers. And there are more than 14 million completely open and accessible academic papers available through that service of the Internet Archive. And those are all archived into the Wayback Machine. I do want to note that this year last year, we started adding some yellow banners to the top of some of the pages played back from the Wayback Machine. And this is of special interest to this community here, the Credibility Coalition, and the work that we're doing to try to address issues of mis and disinformation. The problem we were trying to solve, which was brought principally to our attention by Joan Donovan in an article she wrote in MIT's Technology Review, was the pattern of people publishing some mis or disinformation on some platform, and then maybe the platform removes it, and then the Wayback Machine archive of that web resource is propagated on social media and other methods. Um, and to the patron, to the person who just maybe is looking on Twitter and sees a link and clicks on it, and they get the Wayback Machine playback version of that thing that had been published and maybe now has been retracted or changed or something, they have no way of knowing any of that history. They have no way of knowing the context. So what we decided to do was in certain use cases to add a yellow banner to the top of Wayback Machine playback URLs to provide additional context. We refer to these as context banners. Examples of this would be if an article had been deleted from a platform, say Medium. We also worked with Our.News and about a half a dozen fact-checking organizations, Washington Post Fact Check, PolitiFact, and others, to identify articles that had been fact-checked. And if they had add a banner, say the article has been fact-checked by the organization, the fact-checking organization, and then the fact check. Another example is if the URL had been used, say, in a disinformation campaign that had been documented by a research organization. The two that we work with are Graphica and Stanford Internet Observatory. And in which case maybe a data set had been published by those research organizations associated with a paper. And so we say, you know, this URL was included in a data set by a paper by, and then a link to them. This idea of adding context to archives in general is not a novel idea. It's not a new idea. Museums and libraries and archives have been doing it for a long time. We've been doing it for years. In the Wayback Machine, with a little link on the top right says about this capture. And if you click on that link, you can see the provenance of every URL associated with a web page. We are looking at expanding this. So another example might be if you're on a playback URL, you could know, oh, is this available on the live web or would it return a 404? Another thing we'd like to add is on a playback URL, give me a list of all of the inbound links that we have for that URL, because we have trillions and trillions of links in the Wayback Machine. So our graph of the interconnection between those URLs is pretty extensive. So exposing that is another example of what we might do with context. But I've been talking too long, and I want to end here with just a little note to books and controlled digital lending. I'm sure this is a topic that many people have been thinking about. And it's basically the method by which the Internet Archive as a library lends digital versions of books that we acquire. And quite simply, we digitize books. We own those books as any library. We lend books out. We lend books out one at a time with digital rights management based on the number that we own and have in our possession. So if we have one book, then we will lend one version of it out at a given time. And that's the foundation for our book lending project. Many people have questions about CDL. And this week, we hosted a webinar called Myth Busting on CDL. And I'm going to share some links here. But we had experts in copyright and other aspects of libraries address the top 10 myths related to CDL. And it's really wonderful because it's the first time we've kind of been very direct to address some of the questions that people have had. We also produced a 2-minute explainer video about CDL, controlled digital lending, which I'll share here. And it's a wonderful explanation of what we're doing. We also recently, in the last 2 or 3 weeks, produced an explainer video about the Wayback Machine. So I'll share that as well. And there are nuances and features of the Wayback Machine that that we describe and that you might want to explore yourself. So I will stop there and would love, I just want to say that the most important thing is that this is a collaborative effort. And we at the Internet Archive and the Wayback Machine in particular, our work is only possible because of the patrons that use our service, and that collaborate with us. That we're dedicated to continuous learning and openness and sharing. And so if anyone has any question at any time, those of you who know me, I'm pretty accessible, mark@archive.org. Um, and we have a Slack workspace with hundreds of people in it that we invite people in and want to collaborate more directly with us. But I firmly am committed to the idea that we haven't had our best ideas yet, and that they will probably come from our patrons, the people that use our service. So if there's some itch that's scratching you, or that you want to that you think, oh, hey, I would love it if the Internet Archive did X, or if Wayback Machine did Y, I'm all ears.